My name is Carla, and I'm 59 years old. I thought I could trust my Uncle Martin with my life savings until I found out my $7,500 was gone. For most of my life, I'd been the kind of person who believed that hard work and honesty could protect you from the worst of life's storms. I spent 3 decades working as a registered nurse, sometimes pulling double shifts at the hospital just to keep the bills paid and put something aside for retirement. After my husband, Dennis, passed away from cancer 6 years ago, saving became my only focus. It was my way of holding on to control, of ensuring that even though my world had changed, I would never have to rely on anyone again. Every month, I tucked away a little more into my savings account. Over the years, it added up to $27,500, not a fortune, but enough to make me feel secure. That money represented my peace of mind, the fruit of every sleepless night and every tear shed in the break room. Then came Uncle Martin. Martin was my mother's younger brother, charming, magnetic, and the kind of man who could talk his way out of anything. He was 65, but he still had that restless gleam in his eyes, the kind that warned you he was always chasing something. Growing up, he'd been the family's golden boy, always with a new idea, a new business, a new story about how he was going to change everything. Most of those ventures didn't last more than a year, but somehow people still believed in him. When he showed up at my house one Saturday afternoon with a bottle of wine and a binder full of glossy papers, I thought it was just another one of his stories. But this time, he said he'd found something real. "Carla," he said, leaning across my kitchen table, "you've always been the smart one in this family. I need someone like you to believe in me. I'm starting a family-run organic soap business. Nature's Gift. It's clean, eco-friendly, and I've already got a supplier lined up." I listened, half out of politeness, half out of curiosity. He had that way of making everything sound certain, like success was already waiting for him, just around the corner. He pulled out samples of handmade soaps wrapped in brown paper with delicate little leaves printed on the label. They smelled lovely, lavender, rosemary, and citrus. "People love natural stuff now," he said enthusiastically. "Big stores are cutting out chemicals. We can be the next Burt's Bees, but smaller, family-owned. I just need some help to get the initial inventory and marketing started." At first I laughed. I told him I was nearing retirement, not starting a new career. But he kept pushing. He said it wasn't about me running anything, just investing. "You help me get off the ground," he promised, "and within a year, I'll double your money. I'll handle the work, you sit back and collect." He spoke so confidently, so warmly, that I started to imagine what that could mean. Doubling my savings would put me in a much better position. No more stressing over whether I'd have enough for home repairs or medical bills later on. Still, something inside me hesitated. I told him I'd think about it. But over the next few days, he kept calling, not pushy, just gently reminding me of the opportunity. He even dropped by with my aunt, who told me how proud she was of him for finally being responsible. It was strange how everyone seemed so certain this time. And then, the thing that tipped me over the edge, my cousin, Dana, posted on Facebook a photo of her dad in front of a small storefront with a "Coming Soon Nature's Gift Organics" sign. The caption read, "So proud of Dad, can't wait to see this dream come true." I remember staring at that photo, thinking maybe, for once, Martin really was turning his life around. So, a week later, I met him again at a cafe. He handed me a simple agreement, not notarized or lawyer-reviewed, just a typed page saying my investment would fund product and marketing costs, and that he'd repay me within 12 months with 20% profit. "I promise, Carla," he said softly, putting his hand over mine. "You'll never regret this." And I believed him. I transferred the $27,500 the next morning. It was every bit of my emergency savings, money meant to secure my future. But Martin made it sound safe, like family helping family. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. He sent me photos of new packaging, a website mock-up, even mentioned getting a booth at a local farmer's market. I started to feel excited, like maybe this was going to be something meaningful, but then the messages slowed. Texts went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. Emails bounced back. At first, I told myself he must just be busy with the launch. But a month passed, and silence turned to dread. Finally, one morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I got in my car, drove across town to the address he'd listed on the paperwork, expecting to see shelves of soap and maybe a staff bustling about. Instead, I found a dusty window, a for lease sign, and an empty building. Every trace of Nature's Gift Organics gone, and that's when my stomach dropped, because I knew my uncle hadn't just failed in business. He had taken everything I had. The windows were covered in dust, the sign torn down. My money had disappeared along with my uncle. For a few seconds, I just stood there on the cracked sidewalk, staring through the smudged glass of that empty storefront. It looked as if no one had been inside for months. The for lease sign flapped weakly in the wind, half peeling from the window. My reflection stared back at me, small, tired, and shaking. I tried to tell myself there had to be a mistake. Maybe they'd relocated. Maybe business was better than expected, and they'd expanded. I wanted to believe there was some explanation that didn't involve betrayal. But deep down, I already knew. I spent the rest of that morning sitting in my car, frantically calling Martin's number over and over, straight to voicemail. His phone wasn't just off, it was disconnected. I tried texting him, emailing him, even messaging him on Facebook. Nothing. It was as if he'd vanished overnight. Panic started to settle into my bones. I drove to his house, a small ranch-style home on the edge of town that he'd lived in for years. When I pulled into the driveway, the curtains were gone from the windows, and the mailbox was stuffed with junk mail. A neighbor watering her garden looked up and frowned. "You looking for Martin?" she asked. I nodded, explaining I was his niece. "He and his wife packed up about 2 weeks ago," she said. "Said they were moving down south for business. Didn't leave a forwarding address." Her words hit me like a physical blow. 2 weeks ago. He'd been gone for 2 weeks, and I hadn't even realized it. I sat in my car outside his house for a long time, staring at the empty driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. How could someone from your own family, someone you trusted, do something like that? By the time I drove home, disbelief had turned into anger. I called Dana, his daughter, hoping she'd have some answers. When she answered, her voice was cheerful at first, but the second I mentioned her father's name, it turned uneasy. "Wait, you gave him money?" she asked, sounding horrified. "Aunt Carla, I swear I didn't know anything about that. He told us he'd found a new investor. He never said it was you." She started crying, apologizing over and over, but I could tell she was as blindsided as I was. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying his promises. "You'll never regret this, Carla." And I wanted to scream. The next morning, I went straight to the police station. I brought every bit of evidence I had: the signed paper, the bank transfer receipt, screenshots of his messages. The officer listened patiently, took notes, and then leaned back in his chair. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this sounds like a civil matter. He didn't steal it outright. You invested it voluntarily. You'll probably need to talk to a lawyer." Civil matter. Those words stung worse than any insult. To them, it wasn't theft. It was my mistake. I walked out of that station, humiliated and broken. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the betrayal, the shame of being tricked by someone who'd sat at my dinner table since I was a child. For weeks, I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone else. My sister kept asking if I wanted to come over for dinner, but I always said I was working late. I didn't want the pity. I didn't want to see the look in her eyes when she realized I'd been foolish enough to trust Martin. So I threw myself into work. Picked up extra shifts at the hospital. I told myself if I worked hard enough, I could earn back what I'd lost. But every paycheck felt like a drop in the ocean compared to that $2,700. Months passed. Seasons changed. My anger dulled into quiet resolve. I was healing, slowly, or so I thought. Then one evening, while scrolling through local news on my tablet, a headline caught my eye. Pure Root Naturals expands into regional markets. CEO Martin Keene leads the charge. I froze. The photo showed Martin, standing proudly in front of a sleek new storefront. The logo behind him was green and white, but the products stacked neatly on the shelves looked familiar. Too familiar. Handmade soaps, identical colors, identical shapes, even the same leaf design on the labels. My breath caught in my throat. The article gushed about his vision for organic skincare, and how he'd personally financed the company from the ground up. Personally financed. My blood boiled. I clicked through photo after photo, all showcasing the same products he'd promised me were part of our investment. That's when the realization hit like a hammer. Martin hadn't disappeared because he failed. He disappeared because he'd succeeded, with my money. I sat there, trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. He'd rebranded, renamed, and relaunched under an entirely new business, cutting me out completely. For a long time, I just stared at his smiling face in that photo, feeling the humiliation rise all over again. But this time, something else stirred beneath it, something cold and sharp. He thought he'd gotten away with it, but I wasn't done. If he built that company with my money, I whispered to myself, then I'll make sure my name is on it. I didn't have a lawyer, but I had a laptop, coffee, and 30 years of experience in finding out when someone's lying. After discovering that article about Pure Roots, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Martin's smug grin staring back at me from that photo. Standing in front of a building even exist without. It wasn't just anger anymore. I wasn't going to be a woman who got conned and quietly disappeared. Not this time. So I made myself a pot of coffee, pulled out my old laptop, and got to work. I didn't know much about corporate law or business ownership, but I knew how to research. During my nursing career, I'd spent years verifying medications, tracking patient records, and cross-checking hospital data. If I could navigate medical bureaucracy, I could navigate this. My first stop was the State Business Registry website. I searched Pure Root Naturals LLC, and sure enough, there it was, filed just 2 months after Martin stopped contacting me. The registration listed Martin Keene as the principal owner and a small-town address I didn't recognize. The filing date sent a chill down my spine. It was exactly 1 week after my $27,500 transfer. Coincidence? I doubted it. The listed address was a warehouse in an industrial park about 45 minutes away. I stared at it for a long time, tapping my finger against the table. I could have stopped there. I could have accepted that he'd stolen my money and moved on. But something in me refused to let go. I needed proof. Real proof. That Saturday morning, I drove out there. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a delivery truck and a silver SUV that looked eerily familiar. The sign over the door read, Pure Root Naturals, in elegant lettering. Seeing it in person made my stomach twist. The business was real, thriving, and alive with workers going in and out. I parked across the street, pretending to be on a call, but really I was snapping photos through my car window. The building, the company vehicles, even the sign with the LLC number that matched the one on the registry. Then I did something bold, maybe foolish. I walked inside. The woman at the front desk smiled politely. "Hi there. Are you here for a delivery?" My heart was pounding. "Actually," I said, forcing a calm tone, "I'm with a packaging supplier. I wanted to drop off some samples for your purchasing team." It worked. She let me leave a fake brochure from a template I'd printed the night before, just in case. While she stepped away to get a manager, I glanced around. The soaps on display were exactly the same style and scent as the ones Martin had shown me. Lavender, rosemary, citrus, all wrapped in that same brown paper. When the manager came out, it wasn't Martin, just a young man who said he'd been working there for about 6 months. He mentioned the owner, Mr. Keene, was rarely around. That told me enough. As soon as I got back to my car, I took detailed notes, product details, labels, warehouse name, and times. I even photographed the company's business license hanging in the lobby. Every bit of information mattered. That night, I went through every old email I'd ever exchanged with Martin. Buried in one thread, dated right before the money transfer, was an attachment, a PDF of his business plan. I noticed something I hadn't before, a line item showing initial capital deposit, $27,500. My chest tightened. That was my money, but I needed more than that. I contacted an old acquaintance of Martin's, Diane, a woman who'd worked with him years ago in another failed business. She agreed to meet me for coffee. She hesitated at first, but when I told her what had happened, she sighed heavily. "Carla, he told people he had a silent partner who helped him launch Pure Root. I didn't realize that was you." A silent partner. My jaw clenched at the phrase. That was how he saw me, invisible but essential. With Diane's statement, the registry records, my transfer receipt, and screenshots of our messages, I started building what looked like a legal case. I printed everything, organizing it into folders labeled Evidence A, Timeline, and Financials. Still, I didn't know what any of it actually meant legally. That's when I started calling around to find an attorney. Most said they'd need retainers I couldn't afford, until one receptionist transferred me to a pro bono legal clinic that specialized in small business disputes. The following Thursday, I met attorney Linda Cho. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her 30s, with a calm but sharp demeanor. I laid everything out on her desk, my folder of documents, receipts, screenshots, even printed photos from the warehouse. She flipped through each page carefully, humming under her breath. When she got to the bank transfer and the LLC registration, she paused. "So, you gave him this money before he filed for the company?" I nodded. "Exactly 1 week before." She looked back down at the dates, her brow furrowing. "And he acknowledged in writing that it was for his business venture?" I pushed the paper across the table, his signed note promising repayment plus profit. Linda leaned back, tapping her pen against her lip. "Carla, this isn't just fraud." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says someone just realized they've found leverage. "Based on this paper trail, you didn't just loan him money. You entered a partnership, and that means, legally, you might actually be a part owner of Pure Root Naturals." I felt my pulse quicken. Ownership? The very business he'd built from my money, the one he'd erased me from? For the first time since this nightmare began, the scales started to shift. Maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything. I thought I'd lost everything, right? But according to the law, I might have gained a business. When attorney Linda Cho said those words, I just stared at her, trying to make sense of them. Me, a part owner of Pure Root Naturals? I'd come to her office expecting to be told I'd been scammed and there was nothing anyone could do. Instead, she was telling me I might actually have legal rights over the very company my uncle had built with my stolen savings. Linda leaned forward, her tone calm but certain. "Carla, in business law, an agreement doesn't have to be complicated to count. You gave him capital for the purpose of starting the company. He acknowledged it in writing. That makes you, at minimum, a financial partner, maybe even a co-owner." I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I asked what it would take to prove it, and she told me the key would be documentation and witnesses. Anything that tied my investment directly to the creation of Pure Root Naturals could strengthen the case. That night, I went home and dug through every old folder, email, and text message I could find. I compiled screenshots of our conversation threads. His promises. His updates about our project. The invoice showing the transfer date. I even printed the Facebook photo his daughter had posted of him standing in front of the Nature's Gift Organics sign. Proof that his earlier business idea had simply been rebranded into Pure Root. Still, I needed corroboration. Someone else who'd heard him mention my involvement. So I called Dana, his daughter, again. She sounded nervous when she picked up, but when I explained what was happening, she surprised me. "Aunt Carla, I remember Dad talking about you," she said quietly. "He told Mom that you'd helped him get started. I didn't realize he meant your savings." That was all I needed. Confirmation that he'd acknowledged using my money for the company. Donna even agreed to provide a written statement if necessary. When I told Linda, she smiled. "That's excellent. It's corroboration." Within a week, Linda drafted a formal demand letter. It was direct and professional, outlining that I had provided startup funds for Pure Root Naturals, and unless Martin either reimbursed the full amount plus damages or negotiated an equitable ownership agreement, we would pursue legal action. I'll never forget the day that letter was mailed. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. For months, I'd felt powerless, but now I had the law behind me. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Martin. At first, I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, his voice sliced through the line, sharp and cold. "Carla, what the hell is this letter I just got?" I kept my voice steady. "It's a demand for what you owe me." "Owe you," he snapped. "You gave me that money as a favor. There was no agreement." I almost laughed. I have it in writing, Martin. You signed it yourself. There was a long pause, then his tone shifted, from anger to something that sounded like fear disguised as arrogance. You don't want to do this, Carla. You'll ruin both of us. I took a deep breath. You already ruined me. I'm just trying to make it right. He started yelling, the kind of shouting that made my hands tremble. He called me ungrateful, naive, even accused me of trying to steal his company. The irony made me want to scream. You think you can drag me into court? He barked. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I didn't say it out loud, but I did something else. I recorded the call. Linda had explained earlier that our state was a one-party consent jurisdiction. As long as one person in the conversation, in this case me, was aware of the recording, it was legal. I hadn't planned to use it, but after hearing him basically admit to taking my money and acknowledging his company, I knew it could become crucial evidence. After he hung up, I just sat there in silence. The man who used to bring me chocolate as a little girl on my birthday had just threatened me over the phone, like a stranger. When I met with Linda again the next day, I played the recording for her. She listened carefully, then nodded. This is gold, Carla. He acknowledged the money, and he's clearly nervous about exposure. We'll add this to the evidence file. From that moment, everything became real. Linda began drafting court documents, a claim asserting that my $2,700 was the initial capital investment for Pure Root Naturals, entitling me to an ownership stake. She warned me it wouldn't be quick. These cases can drag on, she said, but you've got something most people don't. Proof. As the papers were filed, I felt the weight of months of shame lift from my shoulders. I wasn't just the gullible widow who'd been conned by her uncle anymore. I was a woman standing up for herself. That night, as I sipped tea and stared out my window, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Martin. Just one sentence. If you go through with this, you'll regret it. I read it over and over, my heart pounding. But instead of fear, I felt something colder. Determination. Because for the first time, I realized Martin was the one who should be afraid. When a man realizes he's about to lose everything, he stops pretending to be family. I used to believe blood was thicker than water. But when Martin threatened me, I realized something terrifying. Sometimes family are the first ones to draw blood. After I received that text, if you go through with this, you'll regret it. I took a screenshot immediately and sent it to Linda, my attorney. She replied within minutes, "Do not respond. Just keep everything documented." So, that's what I did. At first, the intimidation was subtle. A few blocked calls that went silent when I answered. Late-night knocks at my door with no one standing there when I looked through the peephole. Then, things started to escalate. One morning, I walked out to my car and found a long, deep scratch running across the driver's side door, the kind that would cost hundreds to repair. There was no note, no witnesses, but I knew. It was too coincidental. The timing, right after the lawsuit filing, spoke for itself. I remember standing in my driveway, staring at that keyed line under the early morning sun, feeling both violated and strangely stronger. He wanted to scare me. He wanted to make me second-guess myself, to feel like I was the one crossing the line. But instead, it just confirmed what I already knew. He was desperate. I filed a police report for vandalism, attaching photos and mentioning the ongoing civil dispute. They couldn't do much, but the officer said he'd keep a record, which was enough for me. I was learning fast. Every threat, every attempt to intimidate me was another piece of evidence that would work in my favor. A week later, I got a letter in the mail from a law firm I didn't recognize. The header read, Defamation and Harassment Notice. Martin Keene vs. Carla Bennett. Inside was a neatly typed document accusing me of making false claims about being an investor in Pure Root Naturals. It demanded I cease and desist from contacting Martin and threatened counter-legal action if I didn't withdraw my ownership claim. My hands shook as I read it. The tone was condescending, cold, like I was some unstable old woman making up stories. I took the letter to Linda, who skimmed through it and chuckled dryly. It's a scare tactic. He's bluffing. If he had any proof to back this, he wouldn't be sending hollow threats. He'd be in court. She helped me draft a professional response. It was short, sharp, and impossible to misinterpret. All claims are substantiated by financial records, signed agreements, and communications acknowledging my investment. supporting documentation attached. We sent it certified mail, with every piece of evidence neatly compiled. 2 days later, I received a reply from Martin's lawyer. Silence. No response. That's when I decided it was time to take control of the narrative. For too long, he'd hidden behind charm and half-truths, convincing everyone he was a hard-working entrepreneur. So I wrote a carefully worded post on my community forum. No personal insults, just facts. Be cautious when investing with family. I trusted someone close to me with $27,500 for a business venture that later became Pure Root Naturals. My name was erased from all involvement. Legal proceedings are ongoing. I didn't even name him directly. But small towns talk. Within a few days, whispers started spreading. A friend from church told me that people were asking questions about Martin's sudden success. A local supplier refused to extend him a line of credit. One of his employees even left a comment under my post saying, "Wish I'd known this before taking that job." It wasn't revenge, it was exposure. Linda called it a turning point. "He can't control the narrative anymore," she said. "That's why he's lashing out." And lash out he did. I started receiving anonymous phone calls late at night. Sometimes it was silence, other times a man's voice whispering things like, "You should stop," before hanging up. The first few times I was terrified. I'd lock my doors twice and keep the lights on all night. But after the fifth or sixth call, fear gave way to exhaustion. I started recording them, saving every voicemail and emailing them to myself for a digital trail. Linda said it was smart. He's building your case for you. Meanwhile, Pure Root Naturals was beginning to suffer. Their online ratings dipped. A few local papers quietly published stories about the ongoing legal dispute after my filing became public record. The same neighbors who used to praise Martin now looked at him differently. For once, he was the one hiding. Then, one Thursday evening, just as I was settling down, with a cup of tea, there was a loud knock at my door. It wasn't polite or hesitant. It was forceful, urgent. My stomach tightened. I checked the clock. It was almost 11 p.m. Peering through the peephole, I froze. There he was, Martin. He looked older, angrier. His shirt was half untucked, his jaw tight, and I could see the wild flicker of desperation in his eyes, even through the narrow glass. He started banging again, louder this time. "Carla, open the damn door. We need to talk." My hand hovered over the doorknob, heart racing. I could hear his breath, ragged and angry, on the other side. Linda's words echoed in my head. "Don't engage with him directly. Call the police if he shows up." But a part of me wanted to face him, to look the man who'd stolen my future in the eye and ask him why. I took a deep breath, every nerve in my body trembling. Then I stepped closer to the door, close enough that he could hear my voice through the wood. "You shouldn't have come here, Martin." There was silence, then his tone dropped to a growl. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're starting." I stood perfectly still, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. After a long moment, I heard his footsteps retreat, the sound of gravel crunching under his shoes, fading into the night. When I finally looked out the window, his car taillights disappeared down the road. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, not to text Linda, not to call the police, but to hit record. Because if Martin thought intimidation would stop me, he had just made his biggest mistake yet. I hadn't seen him in over a year, but when he banged on my door at midnight, I knew the fight wasn't over. The sound jolted me awake. 3 sharp, violent knocks, then silence, then another 3, louder this time, shaking the door frame. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. For a moment, I thought it was another prank, maybe more of his petty harassment. But when I peeked through the living room blinds, I froze. There he was, Martin. He stood on my porch, swaying slightly under the yellow porch light, his hair disheveled, his eyes red and glassy. He looked nothing like the polished businessman from the photos I'd seen online. He looked hollow. He banged on the door again. "Carla, open up, please. We need to talk." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed, "Don't let him in." But then I noticed something. His car, parked crookedly at the curb, the door still open, headlights still on. He was drunk. I took a deep breath, hit record on my phone, and tucked it into the pocket of my robe before unlocking the door. I opened it just a few inches, the chain latch still on. "You shouldn't be here, Martin," I said quietly. He staggered forward, gripping the door frame. "I just want to talk, Carla. Please don't do this to me." I studied him, the slurred speech, the smell of whiskey rolling off. Him. His desperation wasn't just about money anymore. It was about losing control. "You mean don't hold you accountable?" I asked. He shook his head violently. "You're my niece. Family. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Then why did you take my money?" He ran his hands through his hair, pacing on the porch. "I didn't take it. I borrowed it. I told myself I'd pay you back once the business made a profit. But things got complicated. Taxes, investors, supply chain. I cut him off. You built an entirely new company with it and erased my name. That's not borrowing, Martin. That's stealing." His expression flickered, guilt slipping through his drunken bravado. "You don't understand how business works. You never did." "Maybe not," I said, my voice low but steady. "But I understand integrity, and contracts, and lawyers." At that, his eyes widened. "Lawyers?" he hissed. "You think some hotshot attorney's going to help you ruin me? You'll get nothing, Carla. Nothing." I stepped closer to the door, meeting his gaze through the small gap. "Then prove it. Show me proof that you didn't use my money to fund Pure Root." He froze, opening and closing his mouth like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Then, suddenly, his tone softened. He leaned forward, resting his head against the doorframe. "Please," he whispered, "you don't know what this is doing to me. The stress, the lawsuits, the press. I'm drowning." I almost felt pity for him, almost. But then I remembered every sleepless night, every bill I struggled to pay because of his greed. "You did this to yourself," I said. "You could have fixed it a long time ago by doing the right thing." He slammed his hand against the door, making me flinch. "The right thing?" he shouted. "The right thing would have been keeping this in the family, not dragging my name through the mud." That was it. The mask was gone. The charming uncle, the smooth talker, the family man. All that remained was a bitter, frightened man cornered by his own lies. He turned abruptly, muttering to himself, and grabbed a black briefcase from the porch railing. "You want proof?" he spat, shoving it toward me through the small opening. "Here, take it. You think you're smarter than me? Go ahead, use this." The briefcase hit the floor with a heavy thud. He stepped back, glaring at me like he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Finally, he pointed a trembling finger at me. "You'll regret this, Carla. I swear to God you will." And then he stumbled down the steps, got into his car, and drove off into the dark, the tires screeching as he turned the corner. I stood frozen for a long moment, listening to the silence settle back over the house. Then I shut the door, locked every bolt, and just stared at that briefcase sitting on the floor. When I finally opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Inside were folders of financial documents, tax returns, payroll ledgers, and, most damning of all, bank statements showing deposits and transfers from the same account I had wired my money to. Right there, in black and white, was proof that my $2,500 had been the founding capital for Pure Root Naturals. His name was on every line, but the timing, the numbers, everything matched my evidence perfectly. It was the final piece of the puzzle. The next morning, I walked into Linda's office with that briefcase like I was holding a weapon. She opened it slowly, scanning the documents with growing disbelief. When she reached the page that linked my transfer directly to his business account, she looked up at me, her expression fierce. "Carla," she said softly, "this is it. This is the smoking gun." I felt my knees go weak as I sank into the chair. For months, I'd lived under the shadow of doubt, people whispering, the fear that maybe I'd never see justice. But now, for the first time, I could see the end. Linda smiled, that rare kind of smile that only comes when someone knows victory is inevitable. "Carla," she said, sliding the papers into a file folder, "we just won." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my dignity. When the day of the trial finally arrived, I sat in the courthouse hallway, clutching my binder of documents, the same way I once held patient charts during long hospital shifts, tightly, like they were keeping me grounded. The air smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. My palms were sweating, but inside, something steadier had taken root. I wasn't here to plead anymore. I was here to fight. Martin walked in flanked by his attorney, wearing a tailored gray suit and that familiar smug smile that used to fool everyone. For a brief moment, his eyes met mine. There was no trace of shame in them, only arrogance, like he still believed he could talk his way out of anything. "You ready for this circus?" he muttered as he passed me. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, then at Linda, who stood tall beside me, calm as ever. "Let him talk," she whispered. "He'll bury himself." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense but charged. A few local reporters sat in the back, notebooks open. The family business feud had become small-town gossip turned legal spectacle. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, called the session to order, and just like that, my life became a series of exhibits, testimonies, and cross-examinations. Martin's lawyer started first. He painted me as an emotional widow who had misunderstood a generous gift and was now trying to capitalize on family goodwill. I sat there, jaw tight, forcing myself not to react. Every lie felt like a slap, but Linda had warned me. Stay composed, no matter what. Then it was our turn. Linda stood, organized and unshakable. "Your Honor," she began, "this isn't a misunderstanding. This is a betrayal. Documented, recorded, and deliberate." She laid out the timeline clearly, piece by piece. The signed agreement Martin and I had exchanged. The bank transfer dated a week before Pure Root's registration. The emails, the texts, the briefcase of tax documents, and finally, the recording. When Linda played that audio clip of Martin shouting, "You'll get nothing, Carla," the courtroom went silent. You could hear the raw anger in his voice, the admission of ownership, and the contempt. I watched his face as he realized how damning it sounded echoing through the speakers. He looked down, jaw clenched, eyes darting to his lawyer for help that wasn't coming. Then came my turn to testify. I walked up to the stand, my hands trembling slightly as I was sworn in. When I looked out at the courtroom, I didn't see strangers. I saw witnesses to my story, people who might understand how it feels when someone you love betrays you. Linda's voice was gentle as she began. "Mrs. Bennett, can you tell the court what that $27,500 represented to you?" I swallowed hard. "It was everything," I said. "My life savings. 30 years of work, saved dollar by dollar. I gave it to someone I trusted, someone I loved, because I believed in him." The courtroom was quiet. I continued, my voice steadier now. "He promised it was for both of us, that he'd double it, that we were building something together. But when he disappeared, it wasn't just the money I lost, it was my faith and family." Even the judge leaned back slightly, listening. Martin's attorney tried to trip me up during cross-examination. "So you invested without consulting a lawyer? Without formal incorporation paperwork?" "Yes," I said plainly, "because I trusted my uncle. Because that's what you do when you believe in family. Turns out I should have believed in contracts instead." A few people chuckled softly. Even the judge cracked a small, knowing smile. When Martin took the stand, his demeanor had shifted. He tried to charm, to talk about miscommunication, to say he always meant to repay me eventually. But when Linda asked him to explain why my funds matched the company's initial deposit, he stumbled. "Well, she wanted to help," he said, sweating. It wasn't formal." "And yet," Linda cut in, "you used her funds as your capital investment. You registered the company days later. You called her a silent partner, didn't you?" He froze. His lawyer objected weakly, but the damage was done. Linda turned to the judge. "Your Honor, everything about Pure Root Naturals exists because of my client's money and trust. Without her, there would be no company." When the judge left to deliberate, the room buzzed quietly. My hands shook again, but not from fear this time. I'd done my part. For the first time in years, I had stood up to Martin without backing down. It only took 30 minutes for the verdict. The judge returned, adjusting her glasses, her expression unreadable. After reviewing the evidence, she began, "This court finds that the plaintiff, Carla Bennett, did indeed contribute the founding capital to Pure Root Naturals and was misled regarding her role in the business. Therefore, she is entitled to 50% ownership of said company and its associated assets." I gasped. The words echoed in my mind. 50% ownership. It didn't even feel real. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Linda smiled and placed her hand on mine. We did it, she whispered. I turned slowly toward Martin. He looked stunned, pale, shaking his head as if refusing to accept reality. When the judge adjourned and everyone began to stand, he leaned toward me, his voice low and venomous. You'll regret this, Carla, he muttered. You've got no idea what you've started. I met his eyes, calm and steady. For the first time, he looked small to me, just a man caught in his own lies. I picked up my folder, turned to Linda, and said softly, Let's go home. But deep down, I knew Martin's threat wasn't empty. He'd lost control, and men like him don't go quietly. It felt surreal. One day I was a victim, the next a co-owner. The words of the judge still echoed in my mind like a dream I couldn't wake up from. 50% ownership. For months I'd been fighting for justice, and now the court had given it to me. But the truth was, justice didn't feel like victory, not yet. It felt like stepping into a battlefield that wasn't finished. Linda explained it clearly after the hearing. You're officially a co-owner of Pure Root Naturals, she said. That means you have rights to the financials, the operations, even management decisions. But it also means you're walking into a hornet's nest. She wasn't wrong. The following week, I walked through the glass doors of Pure Root Naturals for the first time, not as a visitor, but as an owner. The receptionist's eyes widened when she recognized me. There was a ripple through the office, quiet whispers and sideways glances, as word spread that the lawsuit woman had arrived. Martin wasn't there, of course. He'd stopped showing up once the trial began, delegating everything to his assistant. I was greeted instead by Rachel, the operations manager, a kind woman in her 40s, who seemed both nervous and relieved to see me. Mrs. Bennett, she said, shaking my hand, I just want to say, we've been following the case. A lot of us hoped you'd win. Things haven't exactly been fair around here. Her honesty caught me off guard. You mean Martin? She nodded. He was unpredictable. A lot of us were afraid to speak up. I smiled faintly. Well, you don't have to be afraid anymore. That first day, I spent hours walking through the production floor, rows of soap molds, packaging machines, and employees labeling bars with care. It was hard to believe this entire operation had been born from the money I once thought was lost. But what struck me most wasn't pride. It was the realization of how much potential this company had if it were run with integrity. I called a staff meeting the next morning. Standing at the front of the small conference room, I told them the truth. I know this situation has been difficult. I didn't come here to cause chaos. I came to fix what was broken. From now on, Pure Root will operate honestly. No more under-the-table deals, no more cut corners, fair wages, ethical sourcing, transparency in every decision. Some employees clapped softly, others looked uncertain. But by the end of the week, the atmosphere had changed. People were talking again, not whispering, but discussing ideas. Of course, Martin hated it. He sent a scathing email within days of my arrival, accusing me of meddling and ruining the business. He demanded that I step aside and let him handle the company he built. I forwarded the email to Linda, who replied simply, "He's testing you. Stay professional." So I did what professionals do. I brought in an independent accountant. What they found shocked even me. There were thousands of dollars in miscellaneous expenses that couldn't be traced. Lavish dinners, personal trips billed as client meetings, and unexplained transfers to accounts in Martin's name. The accountant handed me a stack of papers and said, "If you were looking for proof of mismanagement, here it is." I didn't waste time. The next board meeting, my first as co-owner, became a reckoning. Martin attended via video call, his face tense, jaw tight. I laid out the documents for everyone to see, page by page. "These are personal expenses paid from company funds," I said firmly. "Flights, hotels, even jewelry purchases. This isn't business spending. It's theft." He exploded on the screen. "You can't prove those weren't legitimate." I leaned forward. "I don't have to. The records speak for themselves." The boardroom fell silent. Even his own attorney looked uncomfortable. Rachel, sitting at the end of the table, whispered to a colleague, "About time someone called him out." The board voted unanimously to suspend Martin's management authority pending a full audit. It was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Within weeks, word spread. Local business journals ran headlines like Pure Root Naturals faces internal power shift and Founder under fire for misuse of company funds. His polished image cracked under the weight of truth. Suppliers stopped giving him discounts. Partnerships quietly dissolved. Meanwhile, I began rebuilding from the inside out, cutting unnecessary spending, raising employee pay, and donating leftover stock to women's shelters. For the first time, the company's numbers started to stabilize. Then came the final blow. Linda called me into her office with a proposal. Carla, with the audit results, you're in a position to buy out Martin's shares entirely. The court can approve it if he's found negligent. You'd become the sole owner. It felt unreal. You mean, take full control? She smiled. Exactly. The process took 2 months. Martin fought it tooth and nail, but every appeal failed. Eventually, even his own lawyer withdrew from the case. The day the papers were signed, granting me full ownership, I sat alone in my car and cried. Not from sadness, from sheer relief. I walked back into Pure Root the next day and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The company was finally mine, the way it should have been from the start. But peace, I've learned, never lasts long when dealing with men like Martin. A week later, as I sorted through paperwork in my office, the receptionist brought in an envelope. "This came for you," she said softly. It had no return address, just my name written in familiar, sharp handwriting. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, no signature, just one sentence in bold, messy ink. "You may have won, but I'm not done." I stared at it for a long time, the room suddenly feeling colder. Because I knew Martin too well, he wasn't bluffing. Sometimes justice doesn't come from revenge. It comes from taking back what was yours. That sentence has lived in my head ever since the day the court granted me full ownership of Pure Root Naturals. For so long, I thought revenge was about destroying the person who hurt you. I imagined Martin ruined, humiliated, begging for forgiveness. But in the end, true justice didn't come from watching him fall. It came from rising above him. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild both my business and my peace of mind. I poured myself into Pure Root, not as the wounded victim fighting for scraps, but as a leader determined to make something good from the wreckage he left behind. The first thing I did was rebrand the company. I kept the name Pure Root Naturals, but changed the slogan to something that made me smile every time I saw it on a label. Growth begins with truth. Under my direction, we shifted focus to integrity and community. I gave employees better pay, full benefits, and a safe space to voice concerns. We started sourcing ingredients locally, partnering with small farms run by women. Within a year, sales doubled. Our soaps appeared in regional stores, and online reviews called us a company with heart. But it wasn't just about profit. I wanted my victory to mean something bigger than me. Using part of the company's first-year profits, I established the Bennett Fund for Women's Justice, a small nonprofit that provides financial and legal help to women who've been defrauded by family members or close partners. Every time I wrote a check for that fund, I thought of the woman I used to be, sitting alone, humiliated, believing I'd lost everything. And I wanted her to know she wasn't alone anymore. The media took notice. Local news stations ran a feature about the nurse who fought back, and the story spread beyond our small town. I started receiving letters, women in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s, all sharing stories of brothers, husbands, or relatives who'd stolen from them. One letter stuck with me. It was from a retired teacher in Ohio who wrote, "You reminded me that justice isn't about anger, it's about reclaiming what they thought they could take from us." I kept that letter on my desk. Every time things got hard, the paperwork, the long days, the endless decisions, I'd read it and remember why I was doing all this. As for Martin, he vanished from town not long after the buyout. No one saw him again except for a few rumors. Whispers that he'd tried to start another business in another state under a new name. But it didn't last. His reputation followed him like a shadow he couldn't escape. People Googled his name, read the court case, and backed away. I'd be lying if I said part of me didn't enjoy that poetic justice. But mostly, I just felt free. free from the guilt, free from the fear, free from the idea that trusting someone meant surrendering your power. I rebuilt my savings slowly. I paid off my debts. I started traveling again. Not far, just small trips to places I'd always wanted to see. A cabin in Maine, a bed and breakfast in the Carolinas. For the first time in years, I could sit by the water, breathe, and not feel the weight of regret pressing on my chest. One evening, about a year after the verdict, Pure Root held a community event, a small fair celebrating our partnerships with local farmers and artisans. I stood on a makeshift stage, microphone in hand, looking out at a crowd of employees, friends, and neighbors. My heart felt full. A year ago, I began, I thought my life was over. I thought being betrayed by family meant losing everything. But what I've learned is that sometimes loss isn't the end, it's the beginning. The audience was quiet, listening. I saw familiar faces, Rachel from operations, the farmers who now supplied our herbs, even a few former employees of Martin's who had stayed through it all. We talk a lot about forgiveness, I continued, and maybe one day I'll find it in my heart for him. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means moving forward without letting the wound define you. Someone in the crowd clapped softly, then another. Soon the entire tent filled with applause, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I just smiled through tears I didn't bother to hide. After the event ended, I walked through the warehouse, now lit with soft evening light. The smell of lavender, soap filled the air, and I thought about the irony, how something that began with deceit had turned into a symbol of renewal. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. Completely mine. Later that night, as I locked up, I found myself whispering a quiet prayer of gratitude for strength, for resilience, for the strange, winding path that had brought me here. People often ask me if I regret giving Martin that money. My answer surprises them. No, I say. If I hadn't, I never would have discovered who I really am. Because in the end, I wasn't just the woman he betrayed. I became the woman who rebuilt from that betrayal, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. As I left the warehouse that night, I glanced back at the company sign glowing softly against the dark sky. Pure Root Naturals. Growth begins with truth. And I smiled, knowing the story had finally come full circle. He thought he was stealing from me. He thought he'd taken my future. But in reality, he tried to steal my future. Instead, he helped me build it. In the end, I didn't just win a court case. I won back my voice, my power, and the respect I almost lost to betrayal. Pure Root Naturals became more than a business. It became proof that strength can rise from deception. My uncle thought he could take my future and silence me forever, but all he did was remind me how much fight I still had left. Because when someone steals your trust, you can either crumble or rebuild something stronger on the ruins they left behind. And now I can't help but wonder, if someone you loved betrayed you for money, would you forgive them or make them face what they deserve? Every story like this reminds us that justice has many forms, and sometimes the quietest victories echo the loudest. If this story moves something inside you, stay with me. There are many more untold truths waiting to be heard. Let's keep sharing these stories so no one ever feels powerless again, because silence only protects the guilty.